talking, and I'm on the NIH.gov website. So this is a USA website. I'll scroll to the top in a minute, but just want to show you this bit in terms of my search. This is the bit that it highlighted for me. So I'm just going to read it to you. Increased igg4 synthesis due to repeated mRNA vaccination with high antigen concentrations may also cause autoimmune diseases and promote cancer growth and autoimmune myocarditis in susceptible individuals. Now, I said this in summer 2020. Today, if we're looking down to the bottom of my screen, it's the 26th of November 2024. Now, when I said this in 2020, I was completely vilified, called a tinfoil hat wearing anti-vaxxer. Later on, the WHO, the World Health Organization, started call, and our Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, were calling those of us who were asking these sorts of questions far-right terrorists, as well as, you know, the anti-vaxxer slur, etc., the conspiracy theorist. So, as I said, I'm on the NIH.gov website. Let me go to the top so you can see where I am. National Library of Medicine. A study from, my birthday, 17th of May, 2023. And here it is. So you can make of that what you will. Now, of course, I'm sure somewhere in here it will remind everyone how wonderful the vaccines were and how many lives it has saved. The thing I've been saying since 2020 is people should have been told about the risks. People should have been told about the potential side effects, particularly when many of the people who were eventually forced to take it, as in there were mandates issued. Because I had somebody saying, well, nobody forced anyone to take it. I'm like, I don't know. When somebody is saying, no job, no jab, that feels like being forced to me. Coercion, let's say. If somebody is saying no jab, no travel, and you need to travel for your work, or many people wanted to travel to see family members, that feels a bit coercive to me. And when someone is saying no entry into these particular places, spaces, institutions without being vaccinated, and you want or need to go to those aforementioned institutions, whatever they may be, that for me feels more like coercion than free will and choice. And so given that many people did not feel in the moment that they had a choice, because if somebody is saying to you, if you don't do this, you are going to lose your job. If you lose your job and you don't have a second, third, fourth income, and even you might even have 2, 3, 4 incomes, but you need that main job to keep everything ticking over or going. If somebody says to you, if you don't do this thing here, you're out, you're going to lose your job, and therefore you're going to lose your money, and therefore you're going to lose your livelihood, and therefore you're probably going to lose your house, or you can't pay your rent, whatever it is. I don't know. I'm gonna beg to differ with those who are saying, well, nobody forced you to take it, and say, actually, no, look, you maybe didn't have your hand up your back, you know, and get you into an arm lock or a headlock. However, there was coercion there. And that is different to, oh my gosh, this sounds great. Roll my sleeve up, hit me up. They're different propositions for me. Now, we all have our different thoughts and opinions. That's great. But from my perspective, when someone is saying you cannot do this fundamental thing upon which your livelihood rests, that's not my idea of free choice. So given that there were people in the world who didn't feel as though they had, I guess let's put it in medical terms, informed consent, I think they should have been told about these potential risks. Not in 2023, or not me maybe telling you this for the first time in 2024, pushing into 2025. And sorry, for those of you I haven't met, my name is Marilyn Devonish, the neurosuccess coach and futurist. Yeah, you should have been told this from day one. And actually, sometimes, you know, you might be watching and saying, well, did anybody ask? Maybe if they'd asked, they probably would have been told. Well, this is just from my experience. When we first came out of lockdown, I was in London. There was a great big chemist, and it had like literally, I should have taken a photo. Maybe I have got a photo somewhere. I'll have to check my my old files. It had neon signs, big arrows, get your COVID vaccination here. And I'm like, oh, cool. These people are on the ball. Let me go and ask them a few questions. So I went in, spoke to the lady behind the counter, seemed lovely. And I said, can I see, I said, oh, you're doing COVID vaccination? She said, yeah. I said, could I possibly just see the insert that comes with the vaccine? So she did what I call the goldfish, where you like, you know, mouth goes up and down, looks a bit startled, and says, oh, I'll get the pharmacist for it. I said, absolutely wonderful, that'd be fine, thank you. I'll just wait over here. So I waited about 5 minutes because the pharmacist was dispensing something. Now, the pharmacist clearly heard because he wasn't that far away, but I repeated, I said, oh, you know, see, you're doing the COVID vaccines. Could I just see the insert that comes with the vaccination? And he said, it's online. And I said, I don't think it is, because I'd been looking online and I couldn't find it. And I know other doctors and oncologists and some surgeons had also been looking online. They couldn't find it either. But we were in different countries. Many of those were in the United States. Some of them were in Australia. Some of them were in Canada. But I'm thinking, okay, I can't find it here in the UK and they can't find their respective versions. But I'm in a chemist where they've been receiving the product. Of course, they'll have the insert. So eventually I says, look, it's not online. I have looked. I said, so if you can tell me exactly where to look, or perhaps you look, tell me what URL you're looking at, and then I will just make a note of that. He sort of shook his head and said, oh, I don't have that information. I don't have that information. And so I said, well, are you saying then that it didn't come with an insert, that you don't have anything? And there seemed to be a little bit of confusion around that as well. But the net result was they didn't have an insert. And the reason I wanted to see the insert is to see whether all of the things I thought might happen and said might happen in summer 2020, I wanted to see if they were on the insert, so that if somebody went in and wanted to do their own version of informed consent, they could at least read the insert, see what they were letting themselves in for, and make an informed decision from there. So yeah, for those of you who have had it, I'd be interested to know, were you told about the potential promotion of cancer growth? Were you told about the myocarditis? Were you told about the destruction of your immune system? Because one of the things I said in 2020, well, I'm not going to tell you everything I said in 2020 because some of it was a little bit brutal and I don't want to scare anyone. But oops, another one bites the dust and it just fell off the desk like, yeah, bosh. So one of the things I said is we're probably going to see a rise in autoimmune diseases, you know, things like thyroid, shingles, you know, skin conditions, that sort of thing, or people just getting sick all the time, and you get one thing and then you take longer to recover, and then just as you're recovering you get hit again with something else and you're going to find yourself prone and susceptible. I also know, I didn't put it in terms of myocarditis, I said we're probably going to see an increase in heart attacks, an increase in blood clots, and an increase in problems with the brain, because what I've been reading about the mRNA, it said that it does the thing that should be sacred ground and it crosses the blood-brain barrier. If it's crossing the blood-brain barrier, I was then saying we're also probably going to see a number of diseases and the acceleration and even restarting, reigniting old diseases that people had. They've been in remission, things like cancer, and suddenly those things come back with a vengeance. Or people are just getting weird things with liver, kidneys, joints, the bones, etc. Why? Because it messes with your immune system. sends it crazy into overdrive, gets it overproducing, reproducing. Because one of the things about this, now I haven't read the whole article yet. It brought me straight to this part of the document. But in terms of the thing that they call the spike protein, one of the things that worried me about that when I started looking into it in 2020 was that the way it appeared, from what they were saying back then and what was being, we had all the happy clappy stuff, but looking beyond that and beneath that, and also looking at previous studies, because this thing didn't just come out of nowhere. It's been trialed before and failed miserably, and unfortunately it was not a good outcome for the test subjects, which in the cases I read were animals. So what happens with regards to this one, it doesn't appear that the spike protein has an off switch. So I was saying we're probably going to see the first wave of fatalities, let me put it that way, 12 to 18 months after vaccination, the first big wave. You're going to see, of course, the immediate things that happen. And I don't know about you, but I saw videos of people who just literally got the vaccine and then 2 minutes later, slam dunk, they were down and they hadn't even got out of the vaccine centre. But I was saying, yeah, you're going to see that, of course. But I suspected we'd see a first big waves of what they call technically excess deaths, excess mortality. I said 12 to 18 months after vaccination. And then we're going to be looking into a kind of a good 10, 12, 15 year window, by which time no one seemingly in their right mind would be linking what's happening 10 years from now to what happened in 2021. I said that, and I said, I bet you what's going to happen is, to be honest, people aren't even going to link what happens to them in 2021, 2022 or 2023 and beyond with what happened in 2021. And sure enough, people were popping out the woodwork, heart attacks, blood clots, brain aneurysms, shingles. I suddenly started seeing loads of TV adverts for shingles on TV all of a sudden. People were not making that connection. Some of those people had been boosted up a couple of days, couple of weeks, couple of months before. They were not making the connection. So my presupposition that they're definitely not going to be making a connection a few years from now, what can I say? So my question to you is, I'd be really interested to know, number one, what country are you in? Number two, were you told about these potential side effects if you were vaccinated? Were you told, and even if you weren't, were you told by a medical professional about these potential side effects? Now, the list of side effects, there's probably about 30 of them that I saw in 2020. Guillain-Barré syndrome was a big one that came up a lot. Even something called stiff body syndrome. I'd actually never heard of that before. And I was like, wow, that's unusual. And then suddenly, I'm not going to say who it was because that's their business, but they put it in the public domain. But there was a particular singer who said and again, they probably haven't connected it, and they're probably in their mind it isn't connected, and it maybe isn't connected. All I'm just saying, it's a bit of a coincidence. There were also several celebrities, because, we were seeing their faces. They came out and said they had Guillain-Barré or a version of one of them on Instagram. Again, I won't say his name, but if you were following that story, you know who I'm talking about. He, and I believe his partner, I think they both, had it, did some Instagram lives about it. So all of these weird little things that I'd seen on the list, and all the things that I thought, well, hold on, if this is the mechanism, and if this is the way it works in the body, this is probably what we're going to see happening. I started to see all of those things happening in 2021, and it's continued to this day. And then when I started looking at the mechanism of it, I was thinking, well, probably what's going to happen, we're going to see an explosion almost in cancer. And lo and behold, we're now seeing an explosion in cancer. And I was thinking, because this is quite aggressive, it's going to be presenting faster. Well, I think I said to a friend, faster, stronger, harder. And that's probably not the most elegant way to put it. But now there's a name for it. It's called turbo cancer. And one of the things I'm noticing, particularly when you see these stories in the press, now we often hear about the celebrities because their lives are already in the public domain. But for every celebrity you see, you're probably going to have hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people who are not in the public domain going through the same thing. But I say celebrities because that's what we're presented with, and that's the information that comes into the public domain. I've lost count of the number of celebrities now who have come out and either said they've got, you know, fine 1 minute, bang, suddenly they've got stage 3 or stage 4 cancer, or sadly have come out, one recently, again, if you're in the UK and you're into sports, you'll know probably who I'm talking about, but sadly came out and said that it's terminal and they're one of the fittest people on the planet. And again, it's really sad, but it's pretty much almost word for word what I've been saying 4 years ago. And I'm guessing one of the reasons people didn't listen to me, didn't believe what I was saying, is I do not have any medical training. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a surgeon, I'm not a nurse practitioner, I'm not any of those things. I don't have any formal medical training, but I can read and I can research and I can put 2 and 2 together and oftentimes make 4. So that's the approach that I took with regards to this. Somebody is asking me to, well, not inject myself, but let somebody inject me with something. I'm like, cool, let me know what it is. Tell me what it is, what's in it. And you know, I've heard people go, oh, well, nobody knows exactly how their car works. They just get in it and drive it, and nobody knows what's in all the foods we eat. Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true. But I don't know about you, but many people have had several decades on the planet. So some of these things might not be brilliant for them, but it's not causing them to keel over and slam down straight away. So yeah, I was like, oh, that's interesting. I'd just like to know what's in it. And so when it was clear that we weren't going to know what was in it, I remember I was on a Zoom call. Now this would have been in 2021 after, you know, being rolled out and people have been, you know, lining up, taking it, rolling up the sleeves, etc. And I was speaking, and this was a Zoom call, so it wasn't just a one-to-one conversation. It wasn't, you know, behind closed doors and private or anything like that. There was a public Zoom call open to those who wanted to attend. And so I said, can you tell me, can you tell me where I can find the data for contraindications for those who already have autoimmune issues, and also anything about the thyroid? The chief medical officer, for those of you who are outside the UK, they'll be responsible for a particular region. So let's say you might have chief medical officer London, chief medical officer for Birmingham, you know, or the Midlands, you know, but cut it up in regions, just like you might have your state. So you might have a particular state, you know, you might have your Surgeon General, that sort of thing. So responsible post, responsible for quite a large area. They're the chief medical officer. Lovely person, as far as I know, in terms of some of the interactions I've had with them. So I said, can you tell me where I can find the data, or do you have the data with regards to the contraindications for those with autoimmune diseases and also those who already have problems with thyroid? The answer to my question was, it will be 2 to 3 years before we have the data you are looking for. Let me say that again. It will be 2 to 3 years before we have the data you are looking for. Now I'm like, okay, this is a public course. I don't want to be calling anyone out and dragging them across the coals. So I was like, okay, thanks. But in my brain, I'm like, hold up, rewind. Let's just stop for a moment right there. You are telling me that you're recommending we all, because there's a load of people on the call, you're recommending we all take this, but you don't have the safety data, you don't have any information about contraindication, and it's going to be another 2 to 3 years. So now the part of my brain that handles logic was going, well, this doesn't make any sense. In one breath, we're all being told it's safe and effective. A little 3-word mantra. If you want to know more about those 3-word mantras, look up what was happening in the 1940s, some of the big things that went down. They had 3- and 4-word mantras, but if you get it to 3, brilliant. So we're being told this is safe and effective, but you don't have any of the safety. You don't have safety data. You don't have information about contraindications for the immune system, but you're telling everyone it's safe and effective. One of these things doesn't make sense, because if it's safe and effective and we're getting that reassurance, you must have the safety data. You must have the information about the contraindications. Otherwise, what is that assertion based on? And I was just like, I can't work that one out. Now, I think it went over the heads of most of people, because they just, next question. But I was just like, oh, no. I'm not sure how we go beyond this point if you're telling me it's going to be 2 to 3 years before we have the data. But I said to myself, you know what, this is cool. We're all adults here. And this was before they really started turning the screws with the coercion. But I was like, we're all adults. People can make up their own minds. We're here to get the information that you need to know whether or not this is the right decision for you. Fantastic. And then they came for the children. And this was when I was like, no. First thing I did is I thought, well, let me go. Because I remember Baller from Pfizer joyfully announcing they're doing these clinical trials, and one of the clinical trials was for pregnant women. There was a fanfare and they've got 4,000 people. I was like, okay, great, cool, fantastic. So I went to look for the data. I went to look for the clinical trial results in 2021. Couldn't find them. No, that's not true. I could find the information about the trials on the FDA, CDC, and you go to the Pfizer website, but then you get directed somewhere else, and you eventually end up on one of these .gov websites where they publish the results of clinical trials. So you either need a trial number or you put your keywords in. So I did all of that, didn't have the trial number, but eventually found the right combination of wording, and I found the clinical trial data. But the bit with the results was empty. I was like, okay, well, women are pregnant for 9 months. It's only been a year, and it's just going to take some time, because we know that Pfizer, bless their little cotton socks, don't have enough staff to handle the data. Well, if what they were saying in court is correct, because they wanted 75 years before they released any of their data. Yeah, I didn't say 75, like the kids go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then they can't count any higher, go 71, 8, no, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 plus 5. They wanted 75 years before they released the data. Why on God's green earth would you want to withhold safety data and information about your product for 75 years? Again, this did not make any sense to me, unless, of course, you've got something to hide. Anyway, their response in court was that they didn't have enough staff to process the information. Dude, you're making billions. At one point, I think it was something, something like 10 billion in a week. They were making billions with a B, billions of dollars. Are you really telling me that you cannot hire more staff to handle the data and look at the safety for something that you are injecting into millions of people and administering billions, with a B, billions of doses around the world. Are you really telling me that you can't put some of those billions towards processing your data and bringing us the safety information? Now, when I was on the call with the chief medical officer, and he said to me, it'll be 2 to 3 years before you get the data you're looking for. In my brain, there was a subtext to that. I was like, I don't believe you. Now, it's not that I didn't believe him. I didn't believe, because I said to myself, and I said to a friend later, I'm like, oh my God, you're not going to believe this. I said, you're not going to find, unless it slaps you in the face, and even if it does, if you don't want to see it, you're not going to see it. I said, they're not going to find, and when I say they, I mean the pharmaceutical companies and actually the government, how I'd seen them behaving during 2020 and into 2021. I said, they're not going to find what they're not looking for, or those things they do not want to find. And sure enough, here we are in 2024. They're going to do anything but. Now, when was this? I think this was in 2022, because I went, okay, cannot find any of the clinical trial data. When I was back on the website, government sites, it said trial data had not yet been submitted. And then they had a date, it's going to be ready. I think one of the dates, because it just went on and on and on. But when I looked 6 months later, etc., one of the dates was then finally, they're going to issue this data in, I think it was July 2023. Now, number one, I had to think to myself, what kind of women are these? Women are normally pregnant for up to 9 months. So I have no idea what kind of gestation period these women had as to why it would take 2 years to find out how they got on with a 9-month pregnancy. But all right. We know the bless their little cotton socks, they haven't got enough staff. All right, cool, here we go. So again, made a little mental note, doing something else. I thought, oh yeah, let me go and see the results of the clinical trials on pregnant women. We'd already exceeded the date now where it absolutely should have been published. And back to the site, said exactly the same thing. Data has not yet been published. But I'm like, well, you've already missed the deadline 3 times now. What's going on? Waited another 6 months, went back and had a look, pushing into 2024, data still not been published. Now, in amongst all that time, because I was doing some research about pregnant women, I came across something that had been happening in Scotland, where they would typically have 2 or 3 neonatal deaths, which is really very sad, very distressing. Suddenly, they were getting 21 or 22 neonatal deaths. This means babies, unfortunately, dying. Now, few people, understandably asked the question, given that they themselves were talking about this massive, because to go from 1 or 2 to 20 to 21 to 22 deaths, that's a big jump in a very short period of time. So the question was posed, with the women who were in this group, this category, who for seemingly inexplicable reasons, unfortunately lost their babies. Were they vaccinated? Do you know what the response of the hospital was? They're not asking the mothers because it will be too distressing. Now, number one, if you recall what I said about 10, 15 minutes ago, however long this recording has been, you may recall that you couldn't even walk into a crummy little pub without some upstart who looked about 12 years old demanding to know your medical status. So are you really telling me that you've got women up in hospital and you don't know their medical status as to whether or not they're vaccinated? I call BS on that one. Can't even see how that could be possible. But let us for a moment assume it is. Are you now telling me that you see this massive spike in deaths of babies, and you're not going to go and ask 21 or 22 women what their vaccine status is for the good of the many? Because if it turns out that those 21 women were all vaccinated, surely surely you should start ringing the alarm to save the millions and billions of women around the world. Oh, no, 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 no. They're not going to ask these 21 women because they don't want them to distress them. I'm like, they're already distressed. It's really sad. And the lives of future generations are at stake here. And for the sake of asking a question of 21 women, you're not prepared to do that to potentially help save the lives of the many that will come thereafter. We also hear the whole correlation does not equal causation. No, it doesn't. However, when you're seeing the same patterns over and 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 over again, you might want to start looking at whether there could be any correlation between these incidents and whether there could be a cause going on there somewhere. I said the same about footballers, sports people. I'm like, what is going on? Look, I've watched a fair bit of sport in my day. Used to be a massive Formula One fan, had partners who love football, so I ended up watching a fair bit of football. And actually, of course, once you pick a side or, they're supporting whoever they're supporting, you get on side with them. And I was a massive fan of, in the Beckham years, wow, Manchester, they were quite a team. I mean, Jesus, just to watch them play was actually pure magic sometimes. So, watched my fair bit of sports. I couldn't tell you, I could count on one hand the number of times I saw someone collapse and die on the screen in front of me. Suddenly, it's happening everywhere. Tennis court, table tennis, the swimming pool, football, American football, children's playgrounds. It was just like, whoa, 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 whoa. It got to a point where somebody said, oh, have you seen this? It's a bit distressing. And I watched it, and my first thought was, oh, I think I watched that last week. And then I thought, Jesus Christ, I've become desensitized to watching people collapse and die on a sports field because I'm seeing it so often now. So I just said, on one of my Facebook posts, this would have been, I think, 2022, seemed to be a lot of footballers collapsing on the pitch. Of course, the pylon was instantaneous, with people telling me that people collapse on the pitch all the time and people die on the pitch all the time, and it's because of the sports drinks and it's because of the exertion. I'm like, dude, they've been drinking sports drinks for a long time now. They've been exerting themselves for a long time. In my, up to that point, 30 odd years of watching sport, I wasn't seeing this every single day across the world. Something's going on here. But of course, as you can imagine, I was called an anti-vaxxer, conspiracy theorist, tinfoil hat wearer, idiot, armchair expert, far right terrorist. I mean, I've talked about all those before. All I was saying is that this doesn't appear to be normal. There's something going on here. And it was heartbreaking because I'm watching it now and getting to the point where I've seen it so many times. I'm like, oh, didn't I watch that one last? Oh, no. Oh, gosh, this is a different one. That's somebody's son, daughter, girlfriend, boyfriend, other half, partner, significant other, aunt, uncle, niece, nephew, relative, friend, colleague. And it's got to a stage where the medical profession are basically, by their actions, saying they don't matter. It's not worth looking into. Oh, well, one of those things. So I'm guessing now we're going to have well, actually, no, because I actually worked it out with some of these scandals. Thalidomide was the big one here. If you're watching from the United States, you were saved from thalidomide by Frances Kelsey. Sterling work on her part. She worked at the FDA. And if you've ever seen the film Painkillers about OxyContin, the FDA agent was basically Frances Kelsey back in the day. The difference is, however, she was not budging, because she looked at the data, she looked at the research, she looked at that drug, and she said, no, this is dangerous, and she wouldn't give it FDA approval. Whereas in painkillers with the OxyContin, they started to wine and dine, if the story is correct. And of course, it's a court case, so you can go and check the court transcripts, etc. But in a nutshell, they wined and dined the FDA agent. He had a slow computer, so they bought him a new state of the art, and then they flew him to their wonderful mansion, and he's in the swimming pool drinking cocktails surrounded by a bevy of beauties, yada, yada, yada. And suddenly he approved the drug, which was absolutely a killer drug. That's why it's called, painkillers. It's a bit of a play on words. But Frances Kelsey, she would not give that stamp of approval. So that's the reason why thalidomide, because the United States is massive compared to the little old UK. Can you imagine if that drug had been unleashed on the United States, how many people would have been affected by that? So United States, you owe Frances Kelsey a debt of gratitude. Now, you may or may not have heard of her. Worry not. Her efforts were rewarded. She did get that acknowledgement. She received a special award from President John F. Kennedy before he was murdered. His anniversary was 4 days ago. Sorry, the anniversary of his passing. So yeah, so without people like Frances, the world would be in an even more dire state. But yeah, it seems that we don't have those same sorts of gatekeepers now. We've got people who are willing to look the other way and pretend there's nothing going on. And Frances, actually, please look her up. She's number one. She only got the job because this was back in the day before we had all the, computers, internet, and all, even photographs on CVs, etc. Frances got the job because of her name. They thought Frances was a man. So when she turned up, having got the job, and they were like, who are you? Because they were expecting a man to show up, but she, so God bless her. Oh my God. Yeah, the United States, you were saved from disaster. She has a track record. There was a drug when she was a researcher before she worked for the FDA. While we're on the subject of Frances, please look her up. There was a drug and they noticed babies were dying, and somebody decided to ask the question, is there a common denominator? Frances then realized that all of the children had taken a particular drug. So unlike the hospital in Scotland, which is saying, no, we're not going to bother to look, Frances decided to look and see, could this be the common denominator? And what she found was the particular drug was one that was made for children. Now, the drug itself may have been okay, but there was a sweet coating on the drug to make it palatable for children so that they wanted to eat it, so that it tasted good. And it was the sweet coating over the drug that was killing the children. Frances figured that out because she did what I do not see medical professionals doing at the moment. God, this is going to be a really boring video if you're just looking at the screen. Sorry about that. If I know it's going to be so long, I would have switched the audio on, so at least I could have put some interesting pictures on it. Sorry. And if you're still listening, thank you. But Frances decided not just to look the other way and go, oh, well, that's a shame, rest in peace. She wanted to know what was killing these children. And she started digging. And she found a common denominator, which on the face of it didn't make sense, because they're like, well, no, this should be fine. It shouldn't be carcinogenic. But as I said, when she started digging and really thinking, there's got to be something going on here if they've all had this same drug. And then that's when she really started doing the research, breaking it down, testing everything. She found it was the sweet coating. If it were not for Frances, that's another one that could have swept through the United States and wiped out a whole generation. Because she asked the questions, she did the research, she started saying, we're seeing now in here, and the excess mortality figures around the world for all of those countries who were big on vaccination, it's following that upward trajectory. And there have been adjustments made, so it's not due to COVID. And the mainstream media, the pharmaceutical companies, majority of the medical establishments, institutions, doctors, nurses, etc., they're not asking these questions. They're just, well, I don't even know what I'm not going to attempt to put words in their mouth, but I just wish they would take the approach that Francis took and said, well, hold on a minute, this is what's going on here. There's a pattern here. She was willing to look and ask the questions, and that seems to be sadly lacking in the medical profession, the pharmaceutical industry, and the media today. So I would be asking you as the listener, as the viewer looking at a static page, why don't you think they're asking the question? Why don't you think they're looking? And as I was saying a bit earlier, I started looking, that's how we got onto OxyContin and painkillers and all the rest of it, and thalidomide. I was looking at some of the scandals that are broken. So we had the infected blood scandal here, for example, where people were saying, we think there's something, we think this blood is contaminated, we think there's something going on. No, it's not. Now, they had a very similar catchphrase to safe and effective. Very similar. I've written about it on my Facebook page. And so they gave people this little 3-word mantra and sent them on their way. And lo and behold, 40 years later, whatever it is now, the blood was infected and it was coming from the United States. I believe there was a kind of prison population that were also donating the blood. Many of them had particular illnesses, etc., that were not being screened out, cleaned. That was known, but it was cheap blood. And then that blood was going around the world, ended up here, and there were other things going on. But we had the infected blood scandal here in the United Kingdom. We also had the post office scandal where people went to prison. Even there was a problem with the computer system, so it made it look as though they were stealing money in terms of what we call postmasters, when in fact they were not. It was the computer system. And several of them went to prison. Some of them, unfortunately, took their own lives because of the guilt and the shame of what happened. They were, made out to be thieves, and the postmasters were once respected and looked up to in the villages and places that they lived. And then I look at things like OxyContin, thalidomide. We had the Jimmy Savile scandal, where Jimmy Savile was an entertainer who'd been abusing children for decades. That started in the 1960s, were not outed until, many, many decades later. We had the Gary Glitter. And so I just started looking at some of these scandals, and I worked it out that it takes about 47.5 years for the scandal to become public. And then suddenly we're going to have an inquiry about it, and the politicians are going to come out and do some hand wringing and, say how shocking and terrible it is, and this can never be allowed to happen again. And I'm sitting there because it was one after the other. Let's say on the Monday, I watched the post office scandal inquiry. The system was called Verizon. And then the very next day, it was the inquiry for the infected blood scandal. And then the then Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, then came out and did the hand wringing and this is terrible, we can never. And at that point, I was just completely incensed. I'm like, everything that's going on now that was talked about in both of these back-to-back scandal, inquiries, exactly the same thing was happening. People who raised the issue were ignored and ridiculed. The victims who then tried to speak up were ignored, ridiculed, told it was in their head, whatever it was, sent away. Nobody wanted to hear their story. Nobody wanted to listen to them when they started to make links and connections between things. They were told they're completely unrelated, etc., etc. It was a play-by-play for what's happening right now. So completely incensed, I wrote a letter to an email to Rishi Sunak saying, quoted some of his words in terms of we can never let this happen again. And I said, this is exactly what's happening now. And I laid out exactly the same patterns that we are seeing now. People are seeing an issue or a problem. There may be a correlation between what they're seeing and the problem. People are being shouted down, ignored, not listened to, ridiculed, the old gaslighting. And I laid it all out in terms of this is what's been going on with these two scandals. This is what you've just said. This is what's happening right this minute. You are currently overseeing the scandal for 47 and a half years time, whatever the version of Netflix is, just in the same way I watch Painkillers about OxyContin. No doubt somebody will be watching this about the COVID scandal, the vaccine scandal, the mRNA scandal, whatever you're going to call it. And I sent the email. About 35 minutes later, it's got nothing to do with my email. Let me be very clear. I'm just saying in terms of the timing. About 35 minutes later, I'm still sat right here where I am now at my desk. And I see this big announcement flash across my screen about Rishi Sunak. And he just resigned. Well, no, he hadn't resigned, but it pretty much had. He called a general election. So 35 minutes after I sent my email, called a general election. I never had a reply. Now, the general election was on the 4th of July. And I sent this a couple of weeks before. Whatever the time window was, whatever day he resigned, that's when I sent the email. So he was still the Prime Minister. So I would have expected that your secretary would at least bung a holding reply over. Never. And today is the 26th of November 2024. So far as I know, unless it got caught up in a spam filter, I've not had a reply. But I'm like, oh my God. I know I'm not the only one who's seeing these patterns. I know I'm not the only one who's observing this crazy. Well, I felt like I was the only one in summer 2020 because everyone was still excited about, oh my God, we've got a vaccine. We can all go out again. We can party. We can go to restaurants. We can visit family and friends. Woohoo! And I think at that point, I probably was one of the only ones going, I don't think this is a good idea. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there. You know, this was, I don't know. I don't even know how long this is. It feels like it's been about an hour. So if you're still here, thank you. I thank you. But yeah, I'm just going to close with the opening sentence. Increased igg4 synthesis due to repeated mRNA vaccination with high antigen concentrations may also cause autoimmune diseases and promote cancer growth and autoimmune myocarditis in susceptible individuals. And unfortunately, the way people have been boosting this thing up, because there are studies now that are showing with the increasing number of boosters, the immune system gets more and more damaged. Everyone seems to be making themselves more susceptible. And just think about it. Have you seen an increase in the number of people with myocarditis, pericarditis, heart attacks, blood clots? Have you heard more about people getting turbo cancer straight out the gate, stage 3, stage 4. I've heard terrible stories of people who, let's say, fine at the beginning of June, at the end of June, they get a diagnosis. By the August, they're gone. I mean, it's been that accelerated. Do you know anyone that's happened to you? Have you heard any stories? Have you seen anything in the press? Ask yourself, if you have, do you think it's all a coincidence and just random, weird timing? The excuse was, oh, well, people weren't going for their regular checkups. Like, I don't know about you. Look, here in the UK, a lot of people don't do I know in the United States, you're all very, a lot of people are on the ball. They have their annual physical and they see the gynecologist and then they see their oncologist and then they see their, they've got it all lined up. People aren't quite that organised in the UK. They often wait until there's a problem. So the excuse that, oh, well, people weren't going for the regular checkups. I'm like, oh, I don't think so, because people don't tend to just do it randomly. If there's something wrong, they'll go and see someone. So I don't really think that's a way to explain it. And just a final thing I'm going to say, there was a doctor that I listened to on YouTube. And again, I had somebody ridicule me. Oh, well, that's just a video from YouTube. And I said, the reason the doctor is on YouTube is because all of their other accounts were shut down. So just be on YouTube wasn't a reason to ridicule them, because that does not detract from them being a doctor. So he was, I think it was Verge on Health, it's called. But he was saying, and the way he explained it, he said, with regards to the mass vaccination, which he didn't think was a good idea. So he was one of those who were talking about, well, here's what happens when you do mass vaccination and the reason why it's a problem. And, there was all talk about in the beginning of herd immunity, all that sort of stuff. But one of the things he says, look, when you take the vaccine, it trains your immune system and he described it in terms of like a person. So he said, it describes your immune system to recognize the person in the red anorak. That's the COVID, virus, red anorak. But he said, because the virus then goes, oh, you found something to get rid of me, it's going to mutate. And now it's going to wear a green anorak. So your immune system now is trained to look for the red anorak. But the virus got wise to that. So it mutated, which, if you think about human biology, things you learned, all the resistance and all the rest of it. So your immune system can now only recognize and is looking for the red anorak. But this thing mutated and now it's wearing a green anorak. And then it decides, oh, actually, do you know what? I fancy a bit of blue. And then it goes purple. And then it has all these different color anoraks. And your immune system is not looking for those, can't deal with those, because it's now been trained for the red anorak. So he was explaining that's part of the mechanism, how the immune system is being pretty much destroyed because you've got all these other things coming in now, which your immune system isn't recognizing until it's too late and it's damaged the body. So for me, that was an analogy. I was like, actually, that makes sense. It explains then why so many people have been under the weather continuously. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. I was on a webinar about health, well-being, etc. from 1 a.m. this morning till 3. Actually, he finished about 3:15 a.m. And yes, it's now 4 a.m. So I think it might be bedtime. Might make myself a cup of herbal tea. Had some lovely hemp tea, some loose leaf. So I'm going to go and put kettle on, as we do in the UK. And have a little bit of herbal tea and see if I'm going to have a bit of a nap. But yeah, something to think about, a bit of food for thought. Well, I do sincerely hope that you and the people that you care about are all fit and healthy and well. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you feel brave enough, feel free to share this if you're allowed. We know the algorithms are still a bit crazy. And again, that was supposed to be a conspiracy theory, but now Twitter, Zuckerberg, etc. have all been up in court and told the truth and said they were told to shut people's accounts down. They were told to shadow ban people. They were told to boot them off the platform. So that's another of the conspiracy theorists that bit the dust and turned out to be true. But yeah, if you're in a position where you can share it, feel free. If there's somebody who could benefit from this information, at least, I'm not saying I'm right. This is just some food for thought. So I shall leave it there. Marilyn Devonish, the Neuro Success Coach and Rapid Transformation Specialist and Futurist. Transformationstm.com. Over and out. Catch you later. And I'm now going to discover how long this video has been. 53 minutes and 38 seconds. Da, da, da. As I said, sorry about the lack of moving images. Catch you later.